Are we good? Are we good? Hello, everyone, and and welcome back to Lusus Press's coverage of E3 2016. I am Seth Colvin, as always. Still no sign of Matt yet, so I will be doing Microsoft's post show alone as well. But there was a ton of cool stuff on display, some interesting surprises, and let's just dive right into it because they went for over an hour and a half, I would say, and it was a nice meaty show. It was a bit bogged down in the middle, but overall, really great stuff. So, starting up front, we had the new gameplay for Gears of War 4, which showed Marcus's son and a new character. The say her name was Katie, I believe, something like that. And a third character were attempting to rescue, I believe it was Katie's mom, from a new threat, which seemed to look a lot like the old threat of the whatever the villains from the previous Gears series were called. What are those monsters? The Oh my god. I don't remember what they're called right now, but whatever those monstrous creatures were called, these new monstrous creatures don't look very different, so whatever. The cool thing on display there was the environmental effects. There was a windstorm combo dust storm going on that was causing a lot of physics to occur, as happens in windstorms, and that was causing the environment to dynamically fly into both the player and the enemies as it was shot up. Excuse me. Excuse me. And that looked pretty cool. I don't know. It was hard to tell just how dynamic it was and how much of it was. I guess, I mean, none of it seemed to be pre-scripted, but a lot of it seemed to be the case of, here's the 5 objects that we made that you can hit and that will hit into enemies. So I guess my big question for that type of thing would be, is the environment dynamic enough that I can hit a wide variety of objects and dynamically decide myself, strategically, tactically, what are the objects I want to attack, and decide, hey, is it worth breaking down this wall, because then there'll be additional storm stuff that I need to deal with, but that will take out the enemy. That could lead to like some interesting tactical decisions. Or is this just a Call of Duty Battlefield-esque set piece that is going to happen no matter what, or if it isn't happening no matter what, at least it can only happen in a handful of ways. So those were my questions after watching that demo. It did look very visually impressive, but without a good sense of how emergent that stuff will allow you to get with its gameplay, it's hard to know if it is more for visual spectacle or if it will actually affect your moment-to-moment tactical considerations while playing. So that was Gears of War 4. There were so many games. I'm honestly gonna forget. I want to see if I can find someone who has put up a list already. But moving on, there was the Xbox One S was confirmed and shown, and it is very much a smaller version of the Xbox One. It had some infrared sensor on it, but I'm not entirely certain what that was for. So it was that. There was, let's see, there was Forza Horizon 3 was shown. I think anyone who didn't expect that is I don't know what they're thinking, because they put those out every year. And there was, Let's see. Hold on. I'd love to be able to get a list. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Oh well. Hold on, guys. There was season 3 of Killer Instinct was shown with General Ram from the original Gears of War making an appearance. There was We Happy Few, which is the British developed, and it takes place in England. I believe it's developed there as well. It seemed very reminiscent of 1984 and almost honestly like a mix of 1984 and of Brave New World. It was a dystopian society where you took a medication to be happy, which is very Brave New World-ish. They had that whole society focused on medical happiness through taking pills, but there was also an element of doublespeak and media manipulation going on there that was very reminiscent of 1984, and those are obviously two of the greatest, if not the two single greatest, dystopian fiction ever made. So I can't argue with them taking inspiration from them. It honestly looked really, really cool, and it had a neat visual style that almost reminded me of like V for Vendetta, which was also very heavily inspired by 1984 and Brave New World. And so overall, just really awesome looking title. It's coming to Microsoft's early access-esque program for Xbox relatively soon, I believe they said. So people can try that out. I hope it ends up playing as good as it looked. It obviously has a really nice style to it, a really nice sense of atmosphere, and the question is just really if the mechanically it is as interesting as it is narratively and visually. I believe we've seen in previous trailers a focus on stealth, so I'm hoping for something more along the lines of a Dishonored or a Bioshock than something pure stealth focused. I like the more optional stealth take that we get in some of the Looking Glass studio descendant studios titles. So that's what I'm hoping for there. Looked really nice. Before we move on to some other games, and there were a handful of additional ones, I think well, you know what, honestly, I would probably call it the biggest reveal of the entire show was not a game, but the fact that all future Microsoft exclusives for Xbox One will also be coming to PC on Windows 10 in a single purchase, similar to how Sony does its cross-buy, and Nintendo has done a handful of cross-buy things with the 3DS and Wii U. Microsoft has gotten in on this by making Xbox One and PC games cross-buy, and the key difference here with Nintendo and Sony's efforts is, as far as I can tell, every single title that they are publishing going forward, it looks like will be cross-buy. And so that means that Xbox One will no longer have any exclusive titles that cannot be gotten anywhere else, as all titles will also at least also be available for Windows 10 PCs. So, I know for the console fanboys that may irk them. You know, you spend a lot of money on a system like this, and to then be told, yeah, we're not giving you exclusives anymore. Every game that you play will now be available on Windows as well. That can make you feel like you wasted your money, and that you should have just saved up for a PC and you could have gotten a more powerful system and gotten all of the same games. And there's truth to that, but I think overall, this is a very, very consumer-friendly, consumer-focused choice. They're not gaining anything from this at Microsoft financially. They could sell you two copies of the same game. I have purchased two copies of the same game from Microsoft on both Xbox 360 and PC, on the original Xbox and then on PC. So this is something that they are losing potential, and they are losing actual sales by doing this. And they are also, in addition to losing sales of games, they are losing potential purchasers of the Xbox One who will say, well, I'll just get a PC now. Why do I need an Xbox One? In fact, for me personally, who doesn't have an Xbox One yet, who was waiting to see how things shook out from E3 this year, even with the other announcement that I'll talk about after this, I now have no interest in purchasing an Xbox console, because no matter how powerful they make a future Xbox, I can make a better PC. And I can make it for less money per hertz of performance, let's call it, per flop, if you want to use the graphics card measurement. It's cheaper. The dollar spent per piece of performance, however you want to unitize that, is less than in buying a console, assuming you build it yourself, and then I can handpick the parts that I want, focus on the elements of performance and visuals that I want to focus on, and I won't be missing out on any games, because every game I can then get for that PC. So Microsoft has, for me, essentially made it so I have no interest whatsoever in their consoles, which, I guess that's not a bad thing for me. For me, it's great. I just saved, $300-400, but from Microsoft's action. So, I can't complain personally, and I think there are a lot of consumers who will feel the same way. They get a chance to play games that they would otherwise not be able to play. But it doesn't make a ton of sense from Microsoft's standpoint, because I guess the key difference between this and with Nintendo and Sony is, in their cases, they're doing a cross-buy system that allows you to play a console game on a mobile device once you leave the house. And that's the selling point of, I can play it at home on the big screen, I need to leave, I can take it with me on the go. I can take a laptop on the go, possibly, but I'm not going to take my laptop out on the train, on the bus, and waiting in the airport. I guess I could maybe, but it's not an as easy thing, and a laptop is not a gaming machine necessarily, and gaming laptops are very expensive and just not very worth it, honestly. So the argument of, I'm going to play it on my Xbox One in my house and my PC on the go doesn't make sense, because my PC is also in my house. So I can play it on my TV, and then when someone wants to watch the latest episode of some show I don't watch, I can play it on my computer. I guess could be the argument, but the value added there doesn't make as much sense, I think, for most people. Like I said, for me, it's super nice because I don't have to buy a console, but the actual cross-buy element of it does not seem to be a huge value to me, because I'm not sure how much crossover there is of people who would want to play the same game on both an Xbox and a PC, especially because the Xbox One controllers are compatible with Windows 10, so even if you want to play using a controller, you can play that on PC. And if your PC is not powerful enough or as powerful as an Xbox One, why would you play a game on it ever when you could play it on the Xbox? So I'm not entirely sure that the value added from getting two versions of the game, when the two versions are two platforms that sit on a desk in your home or on a TV stand or whatever in your home, I'm not sure that's a great value added there. But for people who have been on the fence about buying an Xbox One because they're interested in playing Halo or Gears or Forza or whatever, but they didn't want to spend the money on a system just for a couple exclusives, now they don't have to. And I fall into that category. So for me, this is a great announcement, but I both am not entirely certain it adds a ton of value to the average consumer who... It definitely doesn't seem like it adds anything to someone who already owns both an Xbox One and a PC, and it doesn't seem to... And it seems in a sense, to lessen the value of owning an Xbox One. So I can see some backlash from it. Like I said, personally, I think it's great, and if going into the future, it's the type of thing that I think people will really appreciate because it does give them more options. It does let them choose not to purchase the dedicated Microsoft platform, and it makes Microsoft look a lot more consumer friendly, a lot less monolithic and monopolistic, and that's good for their image. So overall, I think it's a good thing in the long run. I'm not entirely sure in the short run if they're going to see more positive reactions to this than negative, but this is one of those cases where I think the negative reactions will be overblown, and I do think they should stay the course on this, and I think it will be really nice, and that's regardless of my personal gain from it. I just think that it's a more consumer-friendly choice, and we don't need a bunch of gamers arguing over which console is better, and this is just, it's overall better. Plain and simple, it is overall a superior option to what they had before. I think it will just take some time for people to get used to the concept of a console without any exclusives, because basically what you have now is a PC that you play in your living room, and I think with this announcement, it's never felt more like that than it does right now, especially with the second announcement, which I'll now get into, which was that they are working on their own updated console similar to the PlayStation Neo that will play 4K and will be VR compatible and such. So yeah, a move that, it's hard to know who came first, but both console manufacturers, obviously, and by both I mean Sony and Microsoft. Nintendo's off doing its own thing, but they both realized that their systems were very underpowered and that they needed to do a more quick refresh than they would traditionally do for a console life cycle. But the big question on my mind is that they continue to point out the much more powerful graphics card and its much more powerful capabilities, which is identical to what Sony is pushing for the Neo, but it seems that both are continuing to use AMD's Jaguar CPU as the base architecture for the system, meaning that even if they can overclock theirs above what the Neo does. They and Sony can battle out for who has the highest clocked Jaguar cores, but there is a very definite limit to how high a Jaguar core can be clocked, and that clock speed is not very high. Sony is nearing the point of a full-blown PC speed with the PlayStation Neo, and if Microsoft wants to go, say, up to 2.5 gigahertz speeds, then they'll be nearing the limitation of what AMD's processor lines are capable of hitting. And at that point, there's nowhere to go from there without building out a new architecture or changing the CPU in a substantial enough manner that not every game for the original systems will still be compatible with the new systems, in the same sense that most games are compatible that are for Windows, or most games that were made for, say, Windows XP are still compatible with Windows 10, but not all. And most games that were made for Windows 7 are compatible with Windows 10, but not every single one. And so that's kind of the issue, is that it's tough to know just how much weight you want to put in backwards compatibility. If you're going to do an iPhone-esque upgrade cycle where instead of having a full new generation of systems, you have a smaller refresh every several years, I think that's smart. I think that allows consoles to stay more concurrent with the power of PCs at the time, and it allows them to update the features more regularly, and that's nice and all, but it doesn't allow for the generational leaps that you have seen previously, where you see entirely new CPU architecture with each new console, and you can't do that if you want to maintain 100% backwards compatibility, or even 95 or 90% backwards compatibility, they'll need to retain the core AMD architecture that they've been using. And AMD does have, more powerful versions of the same architecture, more modern versions, but at some point AMD will move on from that architecture. If they haven't already, I'm not entirely certain what AMD's architecture redesign cycle is looking like right now, but there's a definite question of, are we just going to continue to see more and more powerful graphics cards slapped onto a CPU that continues to feel less and less powerful by the day? And I guess the big issue with that, beyond what I've already stated, the thing that makes it exasperated, that makes it blown even more out of proportion, is that even at launch, the CPU was the least powerful portion of the console. The CPU has always been the bottleneck here, and you can double the clock speed and get, not a full double the performance, but, a 70% increase in performance or something like that if you were to double the clock speed, which I don't think they're going to be able to do. They're probably going to go at most for a probably not even 1.5 times, maybe 1.5 times increase in clock speed. That's, a 50% boost. And what they're talking about with the graphics card is more equivalent to, a 3 or 4 times boost over the previous Xbox One graphics card. And when you already had this disparity where the CPU was the weakest part of the system, you're going to get a even greater disparity when your GPU is that overpowered compared to your CPU. There's also the question of if they are going to stick with the standard DDR3 RAM that was used in the original Xbox, or if they're going to move to the faster, higher bandwidth GDDR5 RAM, or possibly use the newer DDR4 RAM. There's a bunch of different options there. But again, the more components you change, the harder it is to maintain compatibility with games on the original Xbox One. And at some point, you really have to question whether the continuing backwards compatibility will be worth it. I think that's something that developers for Windows have been questioning for a really long time. I think, especially this decade this century, after Apple switched to Mac OS X in the turn of the century, and they basically removed backwards compatibility for all Mac applications up to that point. And a lot of people said they were crazy for doing that, but in doing that, they allowed themselves to build a incredibly sleek, modern operating system that it took Microsoft, in a lot of ways, they still haven't caught up to a lot of the features that Mac OS X, and features, I mean behind-the-scenes features, not, consumer-facing features, but architecturally, they are still in many ways behind what Apple did 15-plus years ago, because they continue to support, at least in theory, applications that were written 20, 30, 40 years ago now. And there's definitely, just to me, a very strong question of, is that worth it for the, maybe, there are a dozen people in the world who need some application that hasn't been updated since the 1980s. I don't know why. It's just, mostly I think it's science applications where you develop the application for this device and you never need to develop another one because it does what you need it to do. And so you make it and you don't have anyone to develop an updated version. But my honest response to that would be, well, just keep your computer and buy a new computer for everything else or something. I don't know. There are issues there. And Apple, I think, has been seeing those same issues crop up with the iOS stuff. And I think looking at iOS, you're going to see a pretty good idea of how this is going to go in the long run, in that most games that work on the earlier iPhones still work today. Sometimes they need an update to make them fully compatible, but there are those that just no longer work, and that's something that if they want to really continue to innovate and push their technical capabilities, they're going to have to accept that there are going to be those games that were just very specifically coded for the exact architecture of AMD's Jaguar cores that will not work once they move beyond that. And unlike Apple's A line of processors, the Jaguar cores have nearly hit their limit, and I'm not sure architecturally what comparable cores AMD has that might be more powerful, or if they possibly moved to an entirely new architecture in the year since. I'm just honestly not entirely sure. But, depending on how long AMD kept with that architecture, there's a very good chance that they have already, or at least will soon be moving on from that. And so there's, once you do that, there's the potential that certain games will just cease to function, even if the new architecture is mostly the same. There are going to be those few differences that might in some way make it so that certain games, and it would be a very small percentage, but certain games will no longer function. And if those developers and those publishers are no longer a business, or just simply don't have the time or the money to update the game for the new system, then those games will cease to function. And that's something that's a if 90% of your games still function on a console release 10 years from now, that's a big improvement over what we have today, where Microsoft adds a handful of games every month or so. So it's overall an improvement, but I think it's worth noting that I highly doubt 5 years from now even every Xbox One game will work on whatever new version of Xbox One Microsoft is shipping at that point. But I do like this concept of no generations. I think it will overall work out better for them in the end, will work out better for consumers in the end, will make its backwards compatibility easier, but the main downside will be the lack of the generational leap that you see in game console making up to this point. You'll see smaller leaps, and overall the quality will improve as much, if not more, over the same period of time. It will just be a more gradual increase instead of going from every 5 to 10 years getting just a massive leap. So not again, I think both the announcement of that and the purchase on Xbox and get on PC as well features are really nice, and I think they are the right choices to make overall for consumers and for Microsoft financially, and as far as public perception of the company and its friendliness towards consumers go. I think in the long run it will work out. I think there's going to be definitely some backlash over both of these announcements early on from people who purchased the Xbox One already and feel gypped when you get a new system so quickly, and you get a bunch of games that were promised as exclusives and now are coming to PC. There's going to be some justifiable anger there, and I think regardless of when Microsoft did this, that anger was going to occur, but I think it's something that needed to be done, and so I think they should stick with this one, regardless of any backlash that occurs. I think in the long run it will be worth it. So that's hardware talk. I know I talk about hardware a lot. I'm a big hardware guy. So let's go back to the games themselves now that we've discussed that. Where do we leave off? We discussed We Happy Few last. Let's see, what else did we have? We had Scalebound shown off. That was actually towards the end. I believe they said that was coming out next year, and they showed off a co-op boss battle that looked pretty cool. It looked a bit slower paced than Kamiya's stuff normally is. As far as the combat goes, it didn't look quite as fast as like Bayonetta or the Wonderful 101 or the DMC series, but it did look like an action game as much as it looked like an RPG. And you had numbers shooting out of the enemies as you hit into them. You had a bunch of big weapons that you were hitting giant monsters with. So you had your monster hunter element. You had your RPG element. You had your I guess the key thing for me is that it did not look like your Monster Hunter style of super slow, super methodical movement and attacks. It looked a lot more like a Platinum action game in that regard. So as long as the action stays, I think adding RPG elements to a Platinum action game is honestly, like, it's not even really a change. I think Bayonetta has had very heavy RPG elements, since the original, and so we're not getting too big of a change here. I think there's a possibility that there could be armor or accessories and equipment, essentially loot, for lack of a better term, in this, and that could be a change compared to Bayonetta, where you did have items that you could equip and accessories and such, but they were purchased at a vendor. There was no droppable loot, and there were only a handful of items that most players probably never even purchased until their second playthrough, if even then. So I think that could be a change with if there's a heavy loot component to it. But then that, it looked like a really great looking Platinum game, and you can ride a dragon in it. So promise of Skyrim has been met just from Platinum. Moving on, continuing with our Japanese theme, we have Recore from Keiji Inafune and his team at Concept, as well as the developers at Armature Studios, which is made up of ex-Metroid Prime developers, and that looked okay. Visually, it maybe looked less impressive than all the other titles shown, but it looked like it had some interesting mechanics and some interesting puzzle concepts and platforming that came from using all your different robotic animal helpers. So I think that it looks cool. I think maybe they should do another couple passes on the visuals, try to bring the quality of that up a little, because it did look a bit underwhelming for a big AAA console exclusive. But I think the gameplay at least looked solid, and once you do that, the rest can fall into place afterwards. You need a solid concept and a solid execution of the core mechanics, and it looked like it had that, so we'll see. It was a bit underwhelming from a technical standpoint, but there's plenty of time. It sounds like that one, I believe, might have been late 2016 or early 2017, but there's still plenty of time to move the visual quality up from this trailer. Then we saw the next game from Playdead, makers of Limbo, called Inside. It was a very quick teaser that still didn't show much in the way of gameplay, but again, it looked very, very cool, and again, it's a PC and Xbox title now, so I'm excited to play it when it comes out. They also announced that because of its upcoming release, they have released Limbo for free on Xbox One for Xbox Live Gold subscribers to download. And if you haven't played Limbo, you should do so, because it's an absolutely excellent game. Have we said Forza Horizon? Did I say Forza Horizon? If I didn't say Forza Horizon yet, that also, the third one was shown. It takes place in Australia, has 4-player, it seemed, co-op throughout the campaign now, and obviously it has cross-buy and cross-play, whatever Microsoft's terms for are, with both the PC and the Xbox One version. So, some cool stuff there. And then we had Dead Rising 4, which was, as I said before the show, leaked in advance, and it was there as promised. We did not see too much. It just confirmed that Frank West, I believe is the name of the character, the protagonist of the original Dead Island, is returning as the protagonist of this new game, which I guess, okay. I don't think I necessarily have a ton of affinity for any of the Dead Rising stories. They're more silly than memorable, which is fine. But I I don't think there are going to be too many people who are excited with the return of Frank West as a character. Maybe the return of the picture-taking mechanics, possibly, but we'll see how that goes. We got another demo of Final Fantasy 15. This one featuring a God of War 3 style giant boss battle. You had a giant Titan hand. I believe they even called it like a Titan, similar to the Atlas battle. Is it Atlas? Yeah, Atlas. Maybe that's the Greek name, or is that the Roman or whatever? The guy, there's the big Titan battle from God of War 3, you were running through on the guy's hand and chopping it up, and you did a very, very similar. This demo was very similar to that battle from God of War 3, and it looked really nice. And that game continues to look more and more like an action game and less like an RPG by the day, which is not a bad thing to me. I like action RPGs. I'm not entirely certain that traditional Final Fantasy fans are going to be super into the direction the team's going, just because of how drastically different it looks from traditional Final Fantasy, and especially being so action-based. I think there's going to be a little backlash for that. I think it looks cool. And if you guys stayed with Matt and I as we were discussing various things last night, I said that I was not a huge fan of Final Fantasy combat systems in the past, and this one looks like one of the more interesting. I really like Final Fantasy 13 system. I really like Final Fantasy 12 system. I think their battle systems have been improving with each entry. But the thing with both 12 and 13 is those were still, they weren't turn-based, but they still had a more passive element to them, where you are issuing commands through a menu, whereas this looks like it is going to be more of a direct press a button attack with your character type of thing, and you have very obviously like real-time dodging and stuff like that you traditionally are reserved for character action games. So that stuff I like. I love dodge mechanics. I think it's one of the things that makes Bayonetta so cool, and makes a lot of Platinum Games stuff really neat, is their counter and dodging systems. So I'm fine with that being added. I do think it makes it much less like traditional Final Fantasy than any game before it, but if you think about it, it was originally pitched when it was Versus 13 as a more action-focused Final Fantasy game, and so, I don't think you could expect anything but that for the eventual release, but it is a very different title than traditional mainline numbered Final Fantasy games. And moving on from that, Stardew Valley is coming to consoles. It was only confirmed for Xbox One at the press conference, but it has since been confirmed for PS4 and Wii U as well. So that's interesting. Stardew Valley, for those unfamiliar with it, it is a PC take on the Harvest Moon series, where you are farming and raising animals, and there's an element of dating sim to it, and a small component of RPG-ness where you collect resources in a dungeon and build better stuff, and it's really nice. It was a really good PC version of that type of game that I played a ton of and really enjoyed, so I'm glad we will see it on consoles, because with the issues with Harvest Moon, the rights to Harvest Moon moving around a lot, it's been tough to keep track of that type of thing and that series, so getting this on consoles will be a nice throwback to those games' heyday before everything went wrong with the financial side of it. So, Stardew Valley coming. Minecraft is joining the whole cross-play initiative of Microsoft's, starting with the mobile and PC and I assume Mac versions of the title, and with announcements that additional features will be coming, I believe, to consoles next year, they said. So we'll be getting, theoretically at least next year, cross-play between the Xbox One version, possibly even the Xbox 360 version, and the PC, mobile, and Mac versions. Gwent, as was rumored, the Witcher 3 card game is getting a standalone release for consoles and PC. Interesting thing that I don't think anyone has confirmed or denied yet. Dead Rising 4, the terminology used when it was revealed was available for Xbox One and PC, not as most other titles at the show exclusive to Xbox One and PC, which says to me that at least possibly it could be coming to PlayStation systems as well, which would be honestly one of the most surprising things to occur at that entire press conference, because Microsoft has been heavily involved in funding the completion of that series. That series only still exists today because Microsoft has co-funded the development of it, definitely heavily with 3, and has been even involved in the funding of the first one and the development of the first one. So it would be surprising to see Capcom go back to a multi-platform release for 4 as they did with 2, but especially because of how much financial pressure Capcom is facing right now, and there was no Resident Evil at this press conference. This was the only Capcom thing on display, so I guess, I don't know, interesting way to go about things there. We'll see, I guess, how that pans out in the coming months as they reveal more about it. Sea of Thieves, the pirate-themed Rare game, was shown in more detail, and it does look to be like something of a pirate MMO, although I don't think it necessarily is an RPG. It seemed more like an MMO action game where you crew a pirate ship with your friends and take down other players' pirate ships and search for treasure and so on, and it honestly looks really neat. I'm not usually into the MMO scene, but this definitely seemed like one of the more interesting MMOs shown off in a while, assuming it is an MMO scale of multiplayer, which wasn't 100% clear in this, but that is what they seem to be implying. So, still excited for that. That still looks really neat, and I think that still has a lot of potential. They showed off State of Decay 2, State of Decay being the semi-open world zombie survival game for the Xbox 360 that was later ported to PC and Xbox One. This one has multiplayer, a feature that was cut from the original that people were disappointed about, and now it seems that they have added that back in for State of Decay 2, something that the developer I know had promised that they were going to include this time around, and that they had wanted to include the first time around, but it was cut because of performance problems, which, it's considering how awful the performance was on Xbox 360, I can understand that. So now with an Xbox One and PC game, they're able to bring the co-op mode that they originally wanted into the game, so that's nice. And let's see, Tekken 7 was revealed. It has a story mode that more seamlessly transitions between cutscene and gameplay. Other than that, we saw Akuma and Hibachi, what the main character, the gray-haired, spiky-haired guy. I don't remember his name. They had a fight and a cutscene that they were in. It looked fine. It looked like more Tekken. They did say that, I believe it was for pre-orders. If you pre-order, you got a free copy of Tekken Tag Tournament 2 for the Xbox 360, which is backwards compatible, so that's probably exciting for some people. This didn't look immediately noticeably different than previous Tekken games, other than the fact that the characters were regenerating their health possibly and not even dying when they're it was unclear if there were changes in mechanics or if this was something that was occurring due to the events of the story around it, but it did look like there were potentially some additional mechanics added around how health was gained and lost, but that could have also just been a scripted, story-driven thing. It wasn't entirely clear to me if that was the case or not. And lastly, I believe we had Halo Wars 2, which is confirmed to be in development at the Creative Assembly, which is the Sega-owned studio that develops the Total War franchise. They recently also worked on Alien Isolation, and they seem to be focused, as most Creative Assemblies games are, on a large-scale battle, large-scale conflict. I guess most likely this will not have Total War's tactic or grand strategy layer, which is focused on the tactical layer. If you're unfamiliar with Total War games, I guess I can explain a little that Total War games have two components. They have a larger grand strategy component, where you attempt to conquer a map in a almost risk-like manner, and then when two armies meet, you move into a tactical, real-time strategy-esque mode where you control your army in that clash. And this looks like it will be more of a traditional RTS than that. Although, it could just be that they were only showing the tactical mode and that they do have a grand strategy layer planned as well. It's hard to know, but that was at the very least not shown. And so I believe that is it. They had a whole bunch of games from their ID at Xbox, which is their indie game program, that were displayed in a sizzle reel. I'm afraid I don't remember what they all were now, but there were a ton of them. So you can take a look at them. I'm sure it's on YouTube now. It's on various websites of your GameSpots and your IGNs. If you want to take a look at that trailer, there are a bunch of interesting looking things in addition to... Yeah, I know I said Stardew Valley, I said Inside, but there were a handful of others as well that were on display there that look pretty cool, and some that maybe didn't look quite as cool, but a lot of neat stuff overall, and a decent showing for Microsoft, a really decent showing, and honestly, like a really, really good job of them in managing to keep most of that under wraps. Obviously, there were a handful of leaks yesterday, but the leaks luckily were about the slim version of the Xbox One, not the new, more powerful version. So I think that threw people off, and so it was more of a surprise when they actually did announce a more powerful version, despite it being rumored. The lack of it being leaked yesterday meant that I think there was maybe a lack of credibility to that rumor, and so they managed to keep that one pretty well under wraps. They managed to keep a handful of these games completely under wraps, not mentioned at all. So overall, cool show. A lot of really neat trailers. Like I said, it bogged down a little in the middle, but really solid beginning, and the end was really up there with the best of Microsoft's press conference, where you just went rapid fire from trailer to trailer to trailer and ended with a big reveal. So, Microsoft has had some really solid press conferences since Phil Spencer took over, and maybe this was not their best paced one. I think the one from last year and from 2 years ago were both maybe a little better paced, but they had fewer games, I think, to show this year, and fewer big reveals as well. But they had things that were a lot closer to completion, and so they were able to instead show some more lengthy gameplay demos in the place of a lot of really rapid-fire trailers. And, well, some of those demos, as they tend to do, fell a little flat. The Minecraft one especially felt pretty forced. The later ones really nailed it, and as I said, as they moved towards the end, they really got their pacing down, did a bunch of rapid-fire trailers there that were very interesting. The one game that we did not see at all that is somewhat surprising is Crackdown 3. Mind you, that was not shown at last year's E3 either. It was shown at Gamescom, so that could be, again, something that they are saving excuse me, for Gamescom in a couple months. But that's been in development for quite some time now. That I believe that was shown in the original sizzle reel of Xbox One games way back when the console was revealed, 3 or 4 years ago. So it's surprising we still have so little to go on about it. They've shown some behind closed doors presentations to the press, but there has been very little publicly released. So a little surprising to not see that here. But other than that, a good show. Yeah, we got some decent stuff out of this one, and overall, just more interesting by far than EA's. Probably more interesting than Bethesda's, if only because there were quite a few actual full-length demonstrations here compared to just that one very lengthy but still probably the best demo of the show thus far of Dishonored 2 yesterday. And but I think just the sheer number of playable demos that were occurring here eclipsed the quality of the Dishonored demo from yesterday, which, again, I've got to hand it to Bethesda. They just started doing press conferences last year, and their focus on doing a really deep dive of one of their games is a really brave thing to do for a press conference, because there's so much potential for things to go wrong, especially in open world games. And last year they'd had a good 25-30 minutes of Fallout 4. This year they had a good 25-30 minutes of Dishonored 2. And I think that's really cool. They're obviously not trying to make this for TV. They are making it for the fans, for the people who love their games, and it shows when you're really doing it for the right reasons and you have the right audience. And I think people really respond to just how much they show off of games that are just really cool looking, and just the amount and the variety is so. Again, I know I congratulated Bethesda for that yesterday, but I do want to congratulate them again, because it's been a really brave choice of theirs, and it's something I hope that they continue to do in the future. And I think part of it is as I think I also said yesterday, they have fewer total games than any of the other publishers that hold a press conference. They only had, I think, 4 or 5 games compared to the 10 or so that EA usually shows up with, and the 20 plus or so that Microsoft had today, and that Sony will likely have, and Ubisoft usually has a good 10 or so. So they have very few games that they publish, and so that allows them to do a deep dive in a way that you wouldn't normally get from a publisher that needs to show off 10 or 15 or 20 games in the course of an hour or two. But I really like that format, and I was pleased to see Microsoft get heavy into live gameplay demonstrations at this conference. But like I said, there are issues where I want to specifically call out, for doing it well, the demo of Sea of Thieves, where you want to show a live demonstration of how this game plays, so you need a bunch of players, and instead of attempting to fake a live play session on stage, they actually invited Rare fans to the studio, had them play the game and recorded them, and just showed that recorded footage, which, it's not live gameplay, but it feels so much more organic and natural when it is organic and natural, and these are actual players actually playing the game for the first time. And I like, as much as I know players put a lot into a live gameplay demo, I think if you want to show off something multiplayer, then maybe it's best to pre-record it and get actual players playing, because you can't make up smack talk like that. It's just, these are executives, they are not actors, they are not improv actors specifically, and so it doesn't work out usually. And the way Rare did it made a lot of sense, and it showed off how fun the game was in a way that, like, it coming so quickly after the Minecraft demo, it really put in stark contrast how bad the multiplayer demos tend to be at these shows, and what can happen if you pre-record stuff. And I understand that there's a trust issue where is this actual footage? Are you doctoring this? And in the end, yeah, they could be doctoring it, but they also could be pretending to play it on stage and still doctoring it, you know? So just because they claim it's a live gameplay demo doesn't necessarily mean it isn't doctored, and just because they are not playing it live doesn't mean it is. And so I don't think that's a fair argument, and I think for the sake of presentation, especially of something that is multiplayer focused, community focused, you should be showing the actual community playing the game and enjoying it. That's a much better way to sell the title than have a bunch of developers on stage faking excitement for something that they have been working on for 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And so I want to praise that. I think it's what has made Nintendo's Nintendo Direct briefings so great for the past several years was the fact that they were pre-recorded, that again, these are executives doing this. These are not professional live performers, and getting them in front of a camera, being able to do multiple takes, not having an audience of 10,000 people in front of them, it just everything ends up better, and it also there's no room for technical malfunction there. You're just hitting play on a video and streaming it. I can do that from my house. I'm literally doing that from my house right now. So there's much less room for technical error there, and you can get a lot more polished presentations that stay on schedule a lot more. So just overall, I think pre-recorded demonstrations are honestly the way to go. I know, again, I get it. You don't trust the publishers. You think they're faking it. But look at Ubisoft. They fake it every single year live on stage, except it's not live. So, just having a person there does not mean the footage you are watching is being played there. Even if they are moving the controller in a way that makes it look like they're playing, it doesn't actually mean they're playing. Just like, even if it looks like it's fake, doesn't necessarily mean it's faked. So, it's impossible to tell. And for the sake of presentation, I just think pre-recorded bits go better. And especially if you want to have developers from around the world doing spiels, getting it live translated can, obviously cause issues, and having that all done in advance can make it a lot smoother, a lot quicker, and especially for people who don't speak English, it can be a very stressful thing to come on stage in front of thousands of English speakers and try to give a speech that none of them are understanding, and there's a lot of issues there. The game developers are not hired because they're public speakers, and so I think pre-recorded is the future. I hope more companies go towards a pre-recorded thing instead of doing a actual live press conference, especially because they're not a press conference anymore. They're a demonstration of the upcoming titles. There's there's nothing there that the average consumer should not see, because they're all streamed to the average consumer, as they're occurring. So if they're being live streamed over the internet anyway, why even hold them live at all? You're not doing a Q&A session. You're not doing anything that actually requires you to live stream anything, and also by removing the live streaming, you drastically lower the chance of stuff leaking out, because you don't need to rehearse in a massive publicly accessible theater for several days if you're recording something, and so you can keep your secrets under wrap there. You don't need to hire stagehands and such that maybe aren't going to adhere to the NDAs they sign. It's just better for everyone. I promise everyone. I know you're all sitting there saying he's crazy. It's just going to lead to more deceit and lies and stuff, and I honestly don't think it will. I think they can lie just as easily to your face live as they can pre-recorded. And what these guys are is MBAs. They do know how to make it sound like what they're saying to you is an amazing feature when really they're screwing you over. That's what they are good at. So, and they're good at doing that on the spot. They're good at doing an elevator pitch to you of their concept. That's what you learn to do as an MBA. And so just being live is no guarantee that there is any more honesty or integrity involved with what's going on than if you record it. Not to say that anyone's being deceitful necessarily, and definitely not intentionally deceitful in the live stage. I just for people worried that it could cause more deception, I don't think that's going to be the case, and I think it will just lead to smoother, more polished presentations and less leaks, things starting on time, all that stuff. So that's my pitch for doing all pre-recorded stuff in the future. Great show from Microsoft. Ubisoft begins, I'm gonna say, probably either at 3:30 or 4:30. Let's see if I can check the time. I know I didn't put it into my into the upcoming events. So let's see. Hold on, I'm looking it up for you guys. Working on it, working on it. You'd think this would be easier to find in this day and age. This is literally each press conference separately. Let's try Kotaku, Rip Gawker. Oh, thanks. This is really nice. Gawker here at Kotaku.com has a nice list of press conference times that even separates it by time zone. So, if you are like me in the central time zone, for example, Chicago, the Microsoft one started at 11:30. No, 10:30. No, 11:30. That's when it started. The PC Gaming one started already. We're not going to be doing anything live with that. I will talk about it after the fact. Ubisoft begins at 3, which is in exactly 1 hour. So I am going to take a break from streaming to give my voice a rest, and then we will begin again tomorrow. Sorry, later in 1 hour. Not even. Probably in about 25 to 45 minutes. Shortly before the start of Ubisoft, we will get back into things. So for now, thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back in maybe 25 minutes. I will set up the event to say it is starting at 2:30, but do not be surprised if it doesn't begin until more like 2:40, because we are running up against that already, and I do want to give my voice a rest for a while. So thank you for listening. See you soon.